This lecture is going to be over neural tube defects. I do want to give you a bit of a warning with this section. There are some pictures that are a little difficult to look at. I apologize if this is upsetting. However, I do think that they are appropriate for you to identify the different neural tube malformations. These neural tube defects can either be of the brain or of the spinal cord, where you have a closure that doesn't occur. The prognosis is going to be determined by the closure site. When you have a closure site that is lower down in the body, obviously the prognosis is going to be much better. Cranial malformation prognosis is generally grim, particularly when you're talking about the contents of the cranial vault. Spinal malformation prognosis is much better. Yet again, general rule of thumb is the lower the closure malformation, the better the prognosis. The cranial malformations, we have three different types. We have Anencephaly. This is where the cranial vault has no brain matter. Children can actually live with anencephaly. There was a young girl in Wichita that lived till she was nearly 6 years old. The way that a good number of these children will live is that they have an intact brain stem. So the cardiac cycle, or the cardiac area, the respiratory area, all of those areas are there in the medulla and the pons of the brain stem. And so as long as that brain stem is still intact, these children can survive for a period of time. Encephaloceles are basically where you have the brain and meninges protruding through the cranial defect. There is a defect generally in the skull. This defect can occur anywhere in the skull, and inside this encephalocele, you'll have the meninges as well as cerebrospinal fluid and some of the brain matter. Again, prognosis is relatively grim. The meningocele is where you have meninges and cerebrospinal fluid protruding through the cranial vault, but no brain matter. The brain is completely intact, and this prognosis is much, much better. Children with meningoceles do survive. Some of them will survive with no defect, or some of them can have significant spinal defects. When we're talking about the spinal cord, Spina Bifida is probably the most recognized spinal cord neural tube defect. This is going to have also some different conditions associated with the spinal malformation. The first one is a meningocele. This is where you have a lump of meninges and cerebrospinal fluid protruding in the meningocele. And you can see here the clear cerebrospinal fluid, and there will be some meninges in there as well. A meningomyelocele is a meninges are protruding through, and you will also a lot of times have pieces of the spinal cord that are in here and separated. So generally this is going to be associated with some type of paralysis. Most of these children will also have things where the cerebrospinal fluid doesn't have a clear path to move, and so they end up with things like hydrocephalus as well as brain herniations. Children with meningomyelocele will end up with something called Spina Bifida Occulta, which has no defect protruding through the mass. Usually those happen way down here at the tailbone, and they are a lot of people don't even know they have them until something causes them to have some kind of medical treatment, and it will be diagnosed from there. Treatment and diagnosis. Diagnosis is made prenatally through sonogram. Now, a lot of times that doesn't happen. My oldest daughter was born with Spina Bifida, and we did not know until the day she was born because my sonograms never picked up on the defect. But sonography is much better than it was back in the day, and so now we usually can pick them up on sonography. Certain malformations, depending on where they are, can be repaired prenatally. The site of the malformation is going to determine whether or not the surgeon can go in and actively open up the uterus, open up the the amniotic sac and performed this surgery to close up that area. Not a whole lot of these have been done, but those that have been done have been relatively successful. So this is the last part of the neural tube defects. Again, any questions that you might have, please send me a text through Remind or an email, and we'll get them taken care of. Have a great day.